fifth graders. How are you all doing? I miss you and I'm excited to continue reading with you today. We're starting on chapter 15 where we ended in Stargirl. The Glendale team had just beat Mika and their postseason run was ended. Stargirl was continuing to cheer and the fans did not like that, hence the tomato to the face. We are starting off with chapter 15 and if you guys remember, Leo got this note from Stargirl, a Valentine's Day card. So I'm interested to see what happens with that. All right, jumping into chapter 15. She gave everybody in school a card. That was my first thought. When I saw Kevin at school, I was about to ask him, but I pulled back. I waited until lunch. I tried to be casual. I slipped it in with the only thing that mattered that day. The school was in mourning. The game, the loss, the tomato. Oh yeah, incidentally, speaking of Stargirl, did you happen to get a card? He looked at me funny. She gave them to her homeroom, I heard. Yeah, I said, that's what I heard too, but was that all? Didn't she give them to everybody else? He shrugged. Not to me. Why? You got one? He was looking away across the lunchroom, biting into his sandwich, yet I felt he was grilling me. I shook my head. Oh, no, just wondering. Actually, I was sitting on the card. It was in the back pocket of my jeans. Meanwhile, all eyes in the lunchroom were on Stargirl. I think we half expected her to see traces of red still clinging to her face. She sat at her usual table with Dory Dilson and several other friends. She seemed subdued. She didn't play her ukulele. She didn't play with her rat. She just ate and talked with the girls at the table. As the lunch period was ending, she got up but didn't head straight for the exit. Instead, she detoured in the direction of my table. I panicked. I jumped up. I grabbed my stuff, blurted, I gotta go, and left Kevin with his mouth hanging and took off. Not fast enough. Halfway to the door, I heard her behind me. Hi, Leo. My face got warm. I was sure every eye was turned to me. I was sure they could all see the card in my pocket. I pretended to look at the clock. I pretended I was late for something, and I ran from the lunchroom. I lurked in the shadows for the rest of the day. I went straight home after school. I stayed in my room. I came out only for dinner. I told my parents I had a project to do. I paced. I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling. I stared out the window. I laid the card on my study desk. I picked it up. I read it. I read it. I read it. I played Hi, Leo over and over again in my head. I tossed darts on the corkboard on the back of my door. My father called in. What's your project, Darts? I went out. I drove around in the pickup. I drove down her street. At the last intersection before her house, I turned off. For hours, I lay under my sheet of moonlight. Her voice came through the night, from the light, from the stars. Hi, Leo. In the morning, it was a Saturday. Kevin and I went together to Archie's for the weekly meeting of the Loyal Order of the Stone Bone. There were about 15 of us. We wore our fossil necklaces. Archie wanted to discuss the Eucene skull he was holding, but all the others could talk about was the game. When they told Archie about the tomato, his eyebrows went up. But other than that, his face didn't change. I thought, this is not news to him. He already knows. Archie spent the whole session that way, nodding and smiling and raising his eyebrows. We dumped our disappointment on him, the devastation of the loss. He said very little. When it was over, he looked down at the skull in his lap and patted it and said, well, this fellow here lost his game too. He was winning for 10 million years or so, but then the early grasses started growing up around him and he found himself in a different league. He hung in there as well as he could. He scored his points, but he kept falling farther and farther behind. The opposition was better, quicker, keener. In the championship game, our boy got annihilated. Not only he didn't show up for class next day, he never showed up, period. They never saw him again. Archie lifted the snouted fox-sized skull until it was side by side with his own face. A good minute passed, as he said nothing, inviting us into our own thoughts. Faces staring at faces, staring at faces. 10 million years of faces in a living room in a place called Arizona. Chapter 16. Monday. Lunch. This time I stayed put when Stargirl came toward my table on her way out. My back was to her. I could see Kevin's eyes following her, widening as she came closer. And then his eyes stopped, and his mouth was sliding toward a wicked grin. And it seemed like everything stopped but the clink of pans in the kitchen, and the back of my neck was on fire. "You're welcome," I heard her say, almost sing. I thought, what? But then I knew what. And I knew what I had to do. I knew I had to turn around and speak to her. And I knew she was going to stand there until I did. This was silly. This was childish, this being afraid of her. What was I afraid of, anyway? I turned. I felt heavy, as if I were moving through water, as if I were confronting much more than a 10th grade girl with an unusual name. I faced the gaudy sunflower on her canvas bag. It looked hand-painted, and at last my eyes fell onto hers. I said, "Thanks for the card." Her smile put the sunflower to shame. She walked off. Kevin was grinning, wagging his head. "She's in love." "Bull," I said. "She is mucho in love." "She's goofy, that's all." The bell rang. We gathered our stuff and left. I wobbled through the rest of the day. A baseball bat could not have hit me harder than that smile did. I was 16 years old. In that time, how many thousands of smiles had been aimed at me? So why did this one feel like the first? After school, my feet carried me toward her homeroom. I was trembling. My stomach had flies. I had no idea what I was going to do if I saw her. I only knew I couldn't not go. She wasn't there. I hurried through the hallways. I ran outside. The buses were loading. Cars were revving. Hundreds of kids were scattering. For months, she had been everywhere, and now she was nowhere. I heard her name. Her name. The same 2 syllables, the same 8 letters that I'd been hearing all year, and suddenly the sound struck my ear with a ping of pure silver. I drifted sideways to overhear. A group of girls were chattering toward a bus. "When?" "Today, after school, just now." "I don't believe it. I can't believe it took so long." "Kicked off? Are they allowed?" "Sure, why not? It's not her school." "I would have kicked her off a long time ago. It was treason." "Good riddance." I knew what they were talking about. It had been rumored for days. Stargirl had been kicked off of the cheerleading squad. "Hi, Leo!" A chorus of girl voices calling my name. I turned. They were in front of the sun. I shaded my eyes. They sang in unison. "Star Boy!" They laughed. I waved and hurried home. I could never have admitted it, but I was thrilled. Her house was 2 miles from mine, behind a little tin-store shopping center. Archie had told me where. I walked. I didn't want to ride. I wanted to be slow about it. I wanted to feel myself getting closer step by step, feel the tension rising like a fizz in a soda bottle. I didn't know what I would do if I saw her. I knew only that I was nervous, afraid. I was more comfortable with her as history than a person. Suddenly, intensely, I wanted to know everything about her. I wanted to see her baby pictures. I wanted to watch her eating breakfast, wrapping a gift, sleeping. Since September, she had been a performer, unique and outrageous, on the high school stage. She was the opposite of cool. She held nothing back. From her decorated desk, to her speech, to her performance on the football field, she was there for all to see. And yet, now, I felt I had not been paying attention. I felt I had missed something important. She lived on Palo Verde. For a person so different, her house was surprisingly ordinary, at least by Arizona standards. Single story, pale adobe, clay red pipe tile roof, not a blade of grass in the small front yard, but rather beryl and prickly pear cacti and clusters of stones. It was dark, as I had intended when I got there. I walked up and down the other side of the street. It occurred to me I might be mistaken for a prowler, so I walked around the block. I stopped into the Roma Delight for a slice of pizza, gulped down only half of it, hurried back out. Couldn't relax when her house was in sight. Couldn't relax when it was. At first, it was just enough to see the house. Then, I began to wonder if she was inside. I wondered what she could be doing. Light came from every window I could see. There was a car in the driveway. The longer I hung around, the closer I wanted to be. I crossed the street and practically dashed past her house. As I went by, I scooped up a stone from the yard. I went up to the street, turned, and looked at her house in the distance. I whispered to the salt-sprinkled sky, "That's where Stargirl Calloway lives. She likes me." I was headed back towards the house. The street, the sidewalks were deserted. The stone was warm in my hand. This time I walked slowly as I approached. I felt strange. My eyes fixed on a triangle of light in a curtained window. I saw a shadow on a yellow wall. It seemed to be drifting, footless in the light. Suddenly, the front door opened. I dived behind the car in the driveway and crouched at the rear fender. I heard the door close. I heard steps. The steps matched the movement of a long shadow cast down the driveway. My breath stopped. The shadow stopped. I felt both ridiculous and, weirdly, perfectly placed, as if crouching by that car was precisely what life had in store for me in that moment. Her voice came from beyond the shadow. "Remember when you followed me into the desert that day after school?" Absurdly, I debated whether to answer, as if doing so would, give me away? I leaned into the smooth metal of the fender. It never occurred to me to stand, to show myself. Hours seemed to pass before I finally croaked, "Yes." "Why'd you turn around and go back?" Her tone was casual, as if she held conversations every night with people crouching behind the car in her driveway. "I don't remember," I said. "Were you afraid?" "No," I lied. "I wouldn't have let you get lost, you know." "I know." A little shadow detached itself from the larger one. It came toward me, wavering over the pebbled driveway. It had a tail. It wasn't a shadow, it was the rat, Cinnamon. Cinnamon stopped at the tip of one of my sneakers. He stood, looking up at me. He put his front paws on top of my sneaker and nosed into the laces. "Are you getting acquainted with Cinnamon?" "Sort of." "Are you lying?" "Sort of." "Are you afraid of rats?" "Sort of." "Do you think I'm cute? If you say sort of, I'll tell Cinnamon to bite you." "Yes." "Yes what?" "I think you're cute." I thought of adding sort of just to be funny, but I didn't. "Do you think Cinnamon's cute?" The rat had climbed fully onto my sneaker now. I could feel his weight. I wanted to shake him off. His tail spilled onto the driveway. "No comment," I said. "Oh my, hear that, Cinnamon? No comment. He doesn't want people to know he thinks you're cute." "I think you're getting a little carried away," I said. "I certainly hope so," she said. "Nothing's more fun than being carried away. Would you like to carry Cinnamon away for the night? He loves sleepovers." "No, thank you." "Oh," her voice was mock pouty. "Are you sure? He's no trouble. He hardly takes up any room. All you have to feed him is a mini-wheat, or 2 grapes. And he won't poop on your rug, will you, Cinnamon? Go ahead. Stand up and tell him you won't. Stand up, Cinnamon." Cinnamon stood on my sneaker. His eyes shone like black pearls. "Doesn't he have the cutest ears?" "Who notices rats' ears?" I looked. She was right. "Yeah," I said, "I guess he does." "Tickle him behind his ears. He loves that." I swallowed hard. I reached down with the tips of my 2 forefingers and tickled the tiny furry spaces behind the rat's ears. I guess he enjoyed it. He didn't move. And then, surprising myself, I moved one fingertip in front of his nose and he licked me. It had never occurred to me that rats do that. His tongue was half the size of my little fingernail. I would have guessed it was rough like a cat's, but it wasn't. It was smooth. And then he was no longer on my foot. He was on my shoulder. I yelped. I tried to swat him off, but he dug into my shirt with his fingernails. Meanwhile, Stargirl was cracking up. I could see the shadow shaking. "Let me guess," she said. "Cinnamon jumped onto your shoulder." "You got it," I said. "And you're thinking about how rats are supposed to go for people's throats." "I wasn't," I said, "but now that you mention it," I clamped my hands around my neck. I felt something in my ear, whiskery. I yelped again. "He's eating my ear!" Stargirl laughed some more. "He's nuzzling you. He likes you, especially your ears. He never meets an ear he doesn't love. By the time he's done, that ear of yours will be clean as a whistle, especially if there's some leftover peanut butter in it." I could feel the tiny tongue mopping the crevices of my left ear. It tickles! I felt something else. I feel teeth! He's just scraping something off for you. You must have had something crusty in there. Have you washed your ears lately? None of your business. Sorry, I didn't mean to get personal. I forgive you. All was quiet for a while, except for the snuffing in my ear. I could hear the rat breathing. His tail drooped onto my front shirt pocket. Do you want to confess now? Confess what? I said. That you're actually starting to like having a rodent poking around in your ear. I smiled. I nodded, dislodging the rat's nose for a moment. I confess. More silence, tiny breathing in my ear. Well, she said at last, we have to go in now. Say good night, Cinnamon. No, I thought, don't go. I still have another ear, I said. If he does that one, he'll never want to leave you, and I'll be jealous. Come on, Cinnamon. Time for Betty bye. Cinnamon went on snuffing. He's not coming, is he? Nope. Then just take a hold of him and put him on the ground. I did so. As soon as I put the rat down, he scooted under the tailpipe and out of sight on the other side of the car. The shadow withdrew. I heard the front door open. Light gushed out. Night, Leo. Night, I called. I didn't want to leave. I wished I could curl up right there in the driveway and go to sleep. I'd been crouching for a long time. It was a chore just to stand. I was halfway home before I could walk right. Chapter 17. Just 2 weeks before, I had found out she knew my name, and now I was loopy with love. I was floating. I floated up the white light that washed my sheets and slept on the moon. In school, I was a yellow balloon, smiling and lazy, floating above the classrooms. I felt a faint tug on my string. Far below, Kevin was calling, "You're in love, dude!" I merely smiled and rolled over and drifted dreamily out a window. This state lasted until lunch, when suddenly I became self-conscious. I was certain that everyone in school knew. They would be waiting for me, turning as I entered the lunchroom, staring. I was uncomfortable in the spotlight, always had been. I was happy to stand behind the camera and let Kevin do the bows out front. So I hid for those 35 minutes in the gym equipment room. I sat atop of the rolled-up wrestling mat, kicking a volleyball against the opposite wall. I had nothing to eat. I had intended to buy, but I wasn't hungry. After school, we found each other, not that we had to look. She took Cinnamon from her bag and put him on her shoulder. Shake paws with Leo, Cinnamon. Cinnamon and I shook paws. Do you believe in enchanted places? She said. You talking to me or the rat? She smiled. She dazzled. You. I don't know, I said. I've never thought about it. I'm going to show you one. What if I don't want to see it? You think you have a choice? She grabbed my hand and almost pulled me off my feet, laughing out loud. We flew across the school fields, swinging hands for all the world to see. We walked for miles, out past the business park, mechatronics, the golf course, into the desert. Look familiar? She said. By now, Cinnamon was riding my shoulder, and I was carrying the ukulele, strumming nonsense. It's where we came that day, I said. She gave a snort. We? I was coming out here. You were half a mile behind. She poked my shoulder, sneaking after me. She poked me again, hard this time, but her eyes were twinkling. Stalking me. I acted horrified, hurt. Stalking? I was not stalking. I was just lagging behind a little, that's all. Following me. I shrugged. So? Why? I could feel a million reasons, but there were no words to express them. I don't know. You liked me. I smiled. You were smitten with me. You were speechless to behold my beauty. You had never met anyone so fascinating. You thought of me every waking minute. You dreamed about me. You couldn't stand it. You couldn't let such a wonderfulness out of your sight. You had to follow me. I turned to Cinnamon. He licked my nose. Don't give yourself so much credit. It was your rat I was after. She laughed, and the desert sang. To the person who expects every desert to be barren sand dunes, the Sonoran must come as a surprise. Not only are there no dunes, there's no sand. At least, not the sort of sand you find at the beach. The ground does have a sandy color to it, or gray, but your feet won't sink in. It's hard, as if it's been tamped, and pebbly, and glinting with, what else? Mica. But you don't notice the ground much. What you notice are the cigarros. To the newcomer from the east, it's as simple as that. The desert seems to be a brown wasteland of dry, prickly scrub whose only purpose is to serve as a setting for the majestic saguaros. Then, little by little, the plants of the desert begin to identify themselves. The porcupiney yucca, the beaver tail and prickly pear and barrel cacti, the buckhorn and staghorn and devil's fingers, the tall, sky-reaching tendrils of the octillo. We walked a weaving line around the plant life, up and down, washes and gillies, the maricopas looming lavender in the distance. When you turned and ran that day, she said, I called after you. You did? I whispered. Whispered? How'd you expect me to hear? I don't know, she said. I just thought you would. I strummed the uke. I squared my shoulders. Giving a rat ride improves the posture. You're shy, aren't you? She said. What makes you think that? She laughed. Were you embarrassed when I pulled you along after school today? All those kids looking? Nah. Are you lying? Yeah. She laughed. I seemed to be good at making her laugh. I glanced back. The highway was out of sight. Do you have the time? I said. Nobody has the time, she said. The time cannot be owned. She threw her arms out and twirled her multicolored skirt, and it looked like a pinwheel taffy. Time is free to everyone. Sorry I asked, I said. She hung her sunflower bag on a cactus arm and cartwheeled toward the maricopas. Crazily, I felt like joining her. I told myself I couldn't because I was loaded down with a ukulele and a rat. I picked up her bag and followed. When she decided to walk like a normal human being again, I told her she was goofy. She stopped, turned to me, and bowed grandly. Thank you, good sir. Just then, she took my arm as if we were strolling down a promenade, and she said, Scream, Leo. Huh? Just throw your head back and let it all out. Scream your ears off. Nobody will hear you. Why would I want to do that? She turned her astonished eyes to me. Well, why wouldn't you? I pointed to Cinnamon. If he screams first, then I will. And I changed the subject. Are we ever going to get to this enchanted place? I felt silly just saying the words. Just a little further, she said. I humored her. So, how do you know an enchanted place when you come to it? You'll see, she said. She squeezed my hand. Did you know that there's a country with officially designated enchanted places? No, I said. Where would that be? Oz? Iceland. Imagine that. I'm ignoring your sarcasm. I think it would be neat if we had that here. You'd be walking or riding along, and there would be the stone marker with a brass plate. Enchanted site, U.S. Department of Interior. We'd litter it up, I said. She stared at me, her smile gone. Would we? I felt bad, as if I'd ruined something. Not really, I told her. Not if there's a don't be a litter bug sign. A minute later, she stopped. We're here. I looked around. The place couldn't have been more ordinary. The only notable presence was a tall, displaced cigarro, a bundle of sticks, in worse shape than Archie Senior. The rest was gray scrub, tumbleweed, and a few prickly pears. I thought it might look different, I said. Special? Scenic? Yeah, I guess. It's a different kind of scenery, she said. Shoes off. We pulled off our shoes. Sit. We sat, legs crossed. Cinnamon scampered down my arm and onto the ground. Stargirl shrieked. Stop! She scooped up the rat and put him in her bag. Owls, hawks, snakes, he'd be a tasty meal. So, I said, when does the enchantment start? We were sitting side by side, facing the mountains. It started when the earth was born. Her eyes were closed. Her face was golden in the setting sun. It never stops. It is, always. It's just here. So, what do we do? She smiled. That's the secret. Her cupped hands rested in her lap. We do nothing, or as close to nothing as we can. Her face turned slowly to me, though her eyes remained closed. Have you ever done nothing? I laughed. My mother thinks I do nothing all the time. Don't tell her I said so, but your mother is wrong. She turned back to the sun. It's really hard to do nothing totally, even just sitting here like this. Our bodies are churning, our minds are clattering. That's this whole commotion going on inside us. That's bad, I said. It's bad if we want to know what's going on outside ourselves. Don't we have eyes and ears for that? She nodded. They're okay most of the time, but sometimes they can just get in the way. The earth is speaking to us, but we can't hear because of all the racket our senses are making. Sometimes we need to erase our senses. Then maybe the earth will touch us. The universe will speak. The stars will whisper. The sun was glowing orange now, clipping the mountain's purple crests. So how do I become this nothing? I'm not sure, she said. There's no one answer to that. You have to find your own way. Sometimes I try to erase myself. I imagine a big pink soft eraser, and it's going back and forth, and it starts down at my toes, back and forth, and there they go. Poof! My toes are gone. Then my feet, and then my ankles. But that's just the easy part. The hard part's erasing my senses, my eyes, my ears, my nose, my tongue, and last to go is my brain. My thoughts, memories, all the voices inside my head. That's the hardest, erasing my thoughts. She chuckled faintly. My pumpkin. And then, if I've done a good job, I'm erased. I'm gone. I'm nothing. And then the world is free to flow into me like water into an empty bowl. And, I said, and I see, I hear, but not with eyes and ears. I'm not outside my world anymore. I'm not really inside it either. The thing is, there's no difference anymore between me and the universe. The boundary is gone. I am it, and it is me. I am a stone, I'm a cactus thorn, I am rain. She smiled dreamily. I like that most of all, being rain. Am I the first one you brought out here? She didn't answer. She faced the mountains, bathed in the sun syrup, her face still and peaceful as I've ever seen a face. Stargirl? Shh. That was the last sound either of us made for a long time. We sat side by side, lotus style, facing west. I closed my eyes. I tried to be perfectly still, and promptly found out that she was right. I could immobilize my arms and legs, but inside me, it was rush hour in downtown Phoenix. I had never been so aware of my breath and my heartbeat, not to mention other assorted grumblings and gurglings. In my head, it just wouldn't close down. Every question, every stray thought from miles around came wandering into my brain, sniffing about, scratching my attention. I tried the eraser, but it wouldn't even wipe out the first toe. I tried to imagine I was sawdust blowing away at the wind, swallowed by a whale, dissolving away like Alka-Seltzer. Nothing worked. I could not make myself disappear. I peeked. I knew I wasn't supposed to, but I did. Clearly, she had erased herself. She was gone. She was serenity, her lips faintly smiling, her golden skin, the glowing threads of her hair. She seemed to have been dipped in sunlight and set here to dry. I felt a pang of jealousy that she could be sitting next to me and not even know it, that she could be somewhere most wonderful and I couldn't be there too. Then I saw the rat. He had crawled out of the bag. He was sitting on it as much as we were. His front paws, I kept thinking of them as tiny hands. They were so human-like, dangling before them. He too was not moving. He too was facing the sunset, his pelt of color a new penny. His peppercorn eyes were fully open. I knew it must have been a trick she had taught him, or imitative rodent behavior. Still, I couldn't help thinking that there was more to it. That the whiskered little fellow was having an experience of his own, which might include digestion in a critter's stomach if Stargirl's fears came true. As quietly as possible, I reached over and scooped him up, held him in both hands. He didn't struggle or squirm, but resumed facing the sunset with his tiny chin resting on my forefinger. In my fingertips, I could feel his heartbeat. I drew him closer to my chest. I dared any varmint to come near. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for another try at enchantment. I don't think I succeeded. I think Cinnamon was a better eraser than I was. I tried. I tried so hard. I almost squeaked, but I couldn't seem to leave myself. And the cosmos didn't visit me. I couldn't stop wondering what time it was. But something did happen. A small thing. I was aware of stepping over a line, taking one step into territory new to me. It was a territory of peace, of silence. I had never experienced such utter silence before, such stillness. The commotion within me went on, but at a lower volume. as if someone had turned down my dial, and an eerie thing happened. While I never did totally lose awareness of myself, I believe I did, so to speak, lose Cinnamon. I no longer felt his pulse, his presence in my hands. It seemed as if we were no longer separate, but we were one. When the sun fell behind the mountains, I felt it as a faint coolness on my face. I don't know how long my eyes were closed. When I opened them, she was gone. Alarmed, I jerked around. She was standing off a ways, smiling. Evening had come. While my eyes were closed, the mountain's dusky lavender had drifted over the desert. We put on our shoes. We headed for the highway. I expected her to interrogate me, but she did not. One moment, the moon was not there, and then it was. Then one bright star. We walked across the desert, hand in hand, saying nothing. And that is the end of chapter 17, and that is where we are going to stop for today. I hope you guys, 5th graders, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you very soon. Bye!